end of it. It's because when it was founded 40 years ago, it was the Small Independent Brewers Association. And about 15, 20 years ago, they decided that small was a little pejorative and didn't really represent the ambitions of some of the larger members of the society. So they changed the name. But we are a Society of Independent Brewers, as the name implies, dedicated to the furtherance of independent brewing in the UK.
Cracking. Okay, I should have mentioned at the beginning of this, bear with us because this is new to me, that if you, the attendees, have any questions, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see and hover with your mouse over the bottom of the screen, you'll see there is a Q&A box there. So if you'd like to ask any questions, just click on that box and we will then get Richard to answer them for you. So first of all, would somebody just like to say hi to me using the question so we can test it's working?
Somebody else? Hey!
Hey, we have one. Thank you. And
okay.
we will.
I'll try and. Okay, you're answering it live. Good.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you, Steve. That's great. Hello, Chris. Hello, John. Do you want to carry on with the other two, Richard?
That looks like that. If I answer live to John, that seems like that is working. Good.
Okay. And hello, Pete and Andy as well. Thank you for that. That's good. It's all working. That's cracking. So, Richard, for the new people, for the people that have just joined us, could you, again, sorry, just tell us about SIBA and what its aims are?
So it's a 40-year-old organisation. It was founded and hasn't really changed in its founding aspirations to represent the small brewers, the independent brewers of Britain and Ireland. It's grown considerably as the number of brewers in Britain has grown, and now represents about, and in these lockdown times, it's difficult to be too precise about numbers, but somewhere around 800 breweries are members of SIBA. And as the regional chair for the East, I'm guessing I represent around about 80 to 100 of those. The geographical distribution of them is across the UK, the London region, which at one point I think went down to 2 breweries, is now rejoicing in about 100. So London and the southeast, which was one of the scarcest ones, is now one of our bigger regions. But I mean that's the same with CAMRA, and people would expect that.
That's cool. You mentioned CAMRA. Now we have a lot of our goals are in common, aren't they? Certainly, your interest in keeping pubs open. We certainly are. And we're interested in good beer, and you guys certainly are interested in that. But SIBA also has some goals that are specific to independent breweries. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about those, lobbying the Parliament and stuff.
The one the organisation is. It's a very democratic organisation in that it is one brewery, one vote, one man, one vote, one brewery, one vote. And so it represents everybody from literally the home brewer who has joined SIBA, as is his right, or her right, up to some fairly substantial enterprises. And the only thing that differentiates them is the subs that we all pay to SIBA go up the bigger you are, and the deeper your pockets are. So there are 5 different ranges of subs. Almost all breweries are in the very small or not quite so small, but still pretty titchy level. SIBA is not, you are not eligible for SIBA if you are a multinational, or you're not British based, or if you're owned by somebody else. So you have to be independent. The Society of Independent Brewers takes the independent bit very seriously. In terms of the things that differentiate SIBA from CAMRA, for example, SIBA does not allow cider producers to be members. We are brewers and only brewers. There was a recent debate about some of the sort of wackier brewing offshoots that to be honest, I don't really know a lot about, but these fermented beverages that are a bit like beer, and we've pretty much, I think, corporately decided that if you want to form a society of people who make stuff that's a bit like beer, feel free, but we're brewers. And we've got quite a lot on our plate at the moment, so let's stick to what we do. Obviously, one of the great successes that SIBA got about 20 years ago, 2001, was a reduction in beer duty paid by small brewers, and that's something that I think is still slightly controversial to this day, in that it doesn't precisely align ourselves with CAMRA as the consumers organisation. But I don't think there can be any doubt that the result of us getting duty reduction for the smallest brewers has resulted in a greater choice of beers available in this country than we've had for 100 years. Absolutely.
And how many breweries do you think we have in the country at the moment? You mentioned that you've got.
It's a perennial debate. Whenever we have a board meeting, there is an official number, but there are various people who keep that official number, and I don't think they can all agree. It's somewhere around the 1,800 to 2,100 mark, and I think some of that is dependent on how you define a brewery. SIBA tends to define breweries as physically possessing a thing that can make beer. But there are cookie brewers who are people who make beer but in other people's breweries, who can be defined as brewers. And there are people who are breweries that share premises, for example, and they're the kind of things that confuse the numbers.
Okay, that's good. Let's go on. Let's talk a little bit about your competitions, because there's some pretty prestigious awards, SIBA tastings, and we've been very lucky in our part of the world, because it's not only your brewery, Milton Brewery, but Turpin's and various other breweries have won very high levels of awards. Could you tell me a little bit about how that goes about and the process of tasting, and how these awards are won, and the beers that you've particularly liked in the if you could tell us about yours if you like, but if you could mention some of the other breweries, that would be cool too.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to the fact that at the moment we're the champion. Minerva is the champion cask beer in the East region. Which we're very, very proud of. One of the reasons we're so proud is the judging panels for SIBA are quite prestigious. They're largely composed of industry professionals, so that's either a lot of beer writers, beer sommeliers, which is a category of employment, I suppose, that didn't even exist 10 years ago, and brewers. They're blind tasted. They are all tasted on the same day, and they're done in categories with some pretty rigorous. I mean, I've been on CAMRA panels many times over the last 21 years. 25 years. I've had the brewery 21 years, but I've been knocking about this industry rather longer. And they are probably the average sort of regional SIBA beer festival tasting panel is very similar to the kind of thing that CAMRA do at the Great British Beer Festival to judge the Champion Beer of Britain. And thus is slightly possibly higher level than you get in some, and I'm certainly excluding Cambridge branch in this, which has always struck me as one of the more professional branches in the country. But particularly some years ago, there were some interestingly composed CAMRA beer competitions that I may or may not have taken part in another city. And besides,
I think you should bear in mind we're all volunteers, Richard.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, as was I.
It's not an onerous task, I must say.
No, and back in the day, it was a very small number of breweries that were actually being judged, and only a couple of them were in the room.
No, if any people who are branch members will know that dog bark in the background was Gladys. Obviously, being the diva she is, and apologies if you don't know who Gladys is. She's my dog who features heavily in Ale. She actually wants to be on the screen, but I'm not going to let her. So my apologies if you hear the dog barking. Yeah, okay, Richard, thanks very much for that. Yeah, the beer type, and we should name the beer that is the champion beer of the region.
Yeah, that's Minerva.
It's Minerva, and I'm looking forward to when I can get it in pubs again. Can we get it in Haymakers now? You've only just finished serving, haven't you, in the Haymakers?
Yeah, we've just come in the last 15 minutes. It's not one of the ones we've got on at the moment. What is it we've got out there? We've got Marcus Aurelius for the dark and strong and mysterious types. We've got Pegasus. We've got Sparta. We have Colosseum, which is one that we brewed just before all this coronavirus started, which is a Burton Ale of just something a little bit different.
Okay.
Very crisp, very bitter. And we've actually concocted a festival special, not the festival special that we would have done in normal circumstances, but we've dry hopped and blended a couple of beers, and we're calling that one Cerevisier Incognito, a bit of a nod to the Darwin theme and the silliness that is going on.
The silliness, yes, indeed. And when are you serving these beers? It's in the Haymakers in Chesterton.
Yeah.
What times?
So we subject to change, but it's been pretty well received today. So it's 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. We're not in the pub, although, as you can possibly tell in the background, I am in the pub because I've literally just come out of the garden. But what we've got is set up outside. We have proper social distancing in place, in through one bit of the garden, queue up, bring a container, clean container. It will be served by CAMRA volunteers, and a pay by contactless, and pick up your now filled container or containers, and out by a different way. And it's been rather convivial today.
Excellent. Okay. And the Haymakers isn't the only pub in our district that is offering a takeaway service. To see a full list, have a look at the Cambridge CAMRA website, and you will. There's a pretty comprehensive list. I'm told it's one of the best in the country, which, as Richard says, being one of the professional branches of CAMRA, you'd expect. And well done to the guys who created that. Okay, well, back to SIBA then. small and independent brewers. Let's talk about you. How did you start?
I started. How did I start? I was the enthusiastic imbiber of beer from a slightly earlier age than maybe I ought to have been. And then I went to university. I was at university in Oxford, and I was one of the founding members of the Oxford University Beer Appreciation Society, which was a lot of fun. And we were at one point, I think, the second biggest Oxford University society after the Union. We were certainly one of the loudest and most fun. We had some tremendous times, and through that I met brewers, as you would, both in this country and some Belgian brewers who to this day remain friends distantly, but necessity at the moment. So when I graduated, I went off to do all kinds of things, and found myself traveling in Pakistan, of all places, having spent 4 or 5 months in Islamic countries. Found myself up a mountain and a bit on the thirsty side, as you do, and with a fellow traveller, we got talking about beer, and a couple of years later, we decided that this brewing lot seemed like a good thing to be in, and that's how we came about looking for somewhere to set up a brewery. And Cambridge wasn't very far away. We were both living in London at the time, and owing to a couple of serious cycle accidents, I found myself in Cambridge, and Cambridge had no famous brewery at the time.
Okay, thank you. And your first beer, the first beer you made, I think I remember it. It was a bitter, wasn't it? The first ever beer that you sold in Cambridge? Or,
the first one we sold was Pegasus.
Right, yeah.
Pegasus has been our bestseller every month since '99 when we started out. Pegasus is our mainstay. We've named when we moved the brewery in 2012. For 13 years we were in Milton. We named the brewery after the place we were in, as a lot of people do. But I've long said that you're not a proper brewery until you moved from the place that your brewery is named after. Several breweries have done it twice. Oakham Brewery are no longer in Oakham, for example. Harwich Town no longer in Harwich. Milton Brewery is no longer in Milton, but we only moved 3 miles up the road to Waterbeach, and we named the building that we now occupy Pegasus House, because Pegasus has always been our sort of flagship. And Gladys is hungry.
Apologies for that. She's a little diva. Okay, well, thanks very much. Now we will get back to SIBA, and we've talked about the goals, and we've talked about the beer tastings. Let's talk about the political side of SIBA and the campaigns that you've fought over the years, and the things that you've won, and the things that you, as an organisation, are still trying to win. Could you sort of give us an overview of that?
Yeah, I'll try. SIBA has various aims and objectives that are published, but I'll try and give you a flavour of the current sort of direction of travel. And I hope you'll understand this is the most difficult time any brewery in the country has faced. Even Shepherd Neame, the oldest brewery in the country, was barely cut its teeth the last time all the pubs were shut. I mean, it was under Oliver Cromwell. So it's, these are literally, nobody has been through this before. And so SIBA's aims and objectives are likely to be modified in light of what's going on around us right now. But that said, some things are unlikely to change. One of which is the progressive beer duty, which we fought for and got. Partly, it has to be said, as the result of a European Union directive that basically forced the then Chancellor, Gordon Brown, to grant it. But it was granted in a way which makes it quite difficult for breweries of a certain size to grow. And there has been considerable debate about the correct way to facilitate that change. And SIBA has taken a view. Some slightly larger breweries, the independent family brewers and the small, the Duty Reform Coalition, have taken a different view. They're typically the slightly larger, older breweries who feel that they've been disadvantaged. And SIBA's view on this is that nobody should be disadvantaged by this, except possibly the government. And I think we'd probably all quite like to disadvantage the government from time to time. And there should be a mechanism whereby a small brewery is allowed to grow without penalty. And that's one of SIBA's long-term aims. One of the other planks of SIBA's sort of raison d'etre is the extension of choice for consumers, and that chimes very much with CAMRA. A lot of the pubs in this country are tied in one way or another, and SIBA members would like access to those pubs. And SIBA owns a wholly owned subsidiary which is dedicated to supplying the big pub chains. It's called the Direct Delivery System, or Beerflex, changes name every 5 minutes. And so that's how you will find SIBA members' beers in Green King pubs, for example, or Enterprise Inns, or Punch Taverns pubs. That is a solution which is better than nothing, but it doesn't work necessarily to the publican's ideal idea of what they should be paying for beer. And as a brewer, I can absolutely assure you it doesn't work to the brewer's idea of what we should be paid for our beer. Basically, the middleman, and that is the pubco, because it's not SIBA, although SIBA does have a small handling charge in that, is screaming off a lot of that money. So there is constant friction and constant attempts to refine that solution. As part of that, SIBA had to, when you're dealing with these very large multinational companies, in many cases, had to develop a system of accreditation, quality assurance, because making beer is not necessarily the same as other industries. And there were various quality assurance initiatives out there, but what's right for making pork pies is just not the same as what would be applicable to beer. So SIBA has come up with an internal thing called FSQ, and that's an important part of what SIBA does, and that's being recognised more and more across the industry now as being the gold standard for our members.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I was just pondering there, because we started this conversation saying that CAMRA and SIBA have a lot of our goals are in common, and I wondered if you could see a time in the future when both CAMRA and SIBA could work together to promote things like pubs, good beer, and all the things that we've talked about earlier. I mean, is that something that you envisage happening in the future?
I think on a lot of things, it's inevitable that in the change realities post-coronavirus, there will be more cooperation, and certainly at the higher levels of SIBA and I think of CAMRA, from what I've seen recently, the will is there to do that. And there are initiatives that I know about. Sadly, the way of things, I'm a director and board, but bound by board confidentiality. But I do know of things that are in the pipeline that will be welcomed by all drinkers as being very sensible. And I think the recent Beer to You or Brew to You scheme, which is obviously jointly CAMRA and SIBA, is a pretty powerful example of us working together. There will obviously be a certain friction because fundamentally brewers want to be paid an enormous amount of money for our beer, and CAMRA members don't want to pay a lot of money for their beer. And now, as a drinker and a brewer, I can perfectly I can see that dichotomy. So there will always remain a necessity for there to be two organisations. They're never going to be aligned perfectly for just obvious reasons. But in a lot of the situations, we find ourselves with a common enemy, and I think when I was thinking about this, one of the things that we're likely to be faced in the next year will be the challenges that Brexit's going to bring, challenges and opportunities, both. And it's been 37 years since Britain's been able to set a duty rate independently for beer, as opposed to wine or spirits, or particularly wine. And that is something that I haven't seen that discussion yet, but I expect in the next 9 months or so that to become quite a big talking point. I have no idea what dimension that discussion will take, but as a SIBA representative and as a SIBA director, obviously I hope that beer, our national drink, will be reflected rather more favourably than hitherto.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd all agree with that. And I think you're quite right to be more than slightly concerned about what could happen after Brexit. We saw lots of politicians drinking beer, but it's a different thing to promoting yourself by drinking a pint, to when it comes down to the beer tax and what they might do to just one part of the industry. Let's go back to the COVID-19 and let's talk about what's going to happen in your view in the next few months. How do you see us getting back to normal? Will we get back to normal? Will there be a different setup in pubs? We can't surely be virtually drinking for the rest of our lives. How do you see it, Welgan? How do you hope it will work in the coming months?
Sadly, how I see it panning out and how I hope it works are probably two very different things. The advice and the whatever notification that we are seeing seems to imply that social distancing is here to stay, at least in the short to medium term. And I think that's going to be extremely difficult for pubs to cope with. Pubs with beer gardens, such as the Haymakers, will be the lucky ones, one hopes. Speaking for myself, we've got 3 pubs in Cambridge. The Queen Edith has got plenty of outside space. We were in discussion with the council about taking over some of the green area to the front, which is currently unoccupied, but you can social distance for a very long way there. The Haymakers has a large garden and a large car park that we could put benches all over. But the Devonshire, you can pretty much touch all 4 walls of the garden by spinning round. And the Dev is by no means unique in that. You can think of pubs like the Mill or the Champion of the Thames, small, great pubs. The Mill's lucky; it's got the Mill Pond, but the Mill Pond is useless if it's raining. The Champ has no outside space at all. So some of Britain's greatest pubs, great heritage pubs, are in desperate need of support and understanding by government that merely saying that you've got to give everybody 6 feet of cleared distance around them is just not going to work, because frankly the best designed pub in the country, the most socially distanced pub, has probably still got urinals 2 feet apart.
Indeed. And let's face it, pubs were meant to be for communal use. They were meant to where people met each other, not where they stood apart from each other. So absolutely. I can understand the difficulties. Perhaps we should all wear makeup, face masks, and gloves, and space outfits, and then we'd be okay. But then it'd be difficult to drink, wouldn't it, through the mask? We'd be struggling just a little bit there. Okay, so we're at 7:30. We've exhausted all of my questions, which just goes to show people learn from this. This is the first one of these, so more questions next time.
We have a live question from Matthew Danish.
Oh, we have Matthew. Thank you very much.
I have said I will answer this question live.
Good for you.
Yes, the reusing space on the streets to spread out, absolutely. And I can think of some streets that are perfectly suited for that. I mean, down at the QE, we have probably 20 yards of grass that is totally unused 365 days of the year. Putting our tables out on that grass would be superb. And we've applied to the council to do it. And I think we can all think of pubs that the traffic outside them is essentially pointless. There are other ways that people can drive. The Champion of the Thames I mentioned earlier is paralleled. It's on King Street, and you can go down Jesus Lane. So to put tables outside the Champion in the Italian thing of having a sort of makeshift piazza, then yeah. And I think these are ordinarily they would seem fairly radical solutions, but these are pretty radical times. I think all of these things will have to be considered, and I think government has to play its part in thinking outside the box. And with my SIBA and my brewery hat on, the government's not very good at that. The SIBA asked back in the middle of March for regulatory easing, I think is probably the correct word, in that as brewers and as licensees, we all have a lot of regulations apply to us, and we should be trusted to know our own customers, not to be daft. And if that means selling beer in pubs, currently you can only sell beer in thirds of a pint, half a pint, a pint to multiples thereof. But if somebody wants to sell it in a litre, well, they should be allowed to. In a brewery at the moment, the minimum we're allowed to sell is 36 pints. Well, why? Who are we protecting in these circumstances? It seems like there is a rigid inflexibility in government that they just need to trust people a bit. I mean, given that they've taken all the rest of our freedoms away, just trust us to just do things okay without having to apply for it.
Okay. Sounds like we'd be going a little bit continental in doing that, which may not be a bad thing in some ways.
It might, this is a temporary thing it's a temporary measure for a temporary, hopefully, a temporary situation. I don't envisage putting benches in the middle of roads forever. But this should, while other social distancing is required, then why not? These are not normal times. And what I'd love to go back to is, the pubs of old. I would like to see people buying in rounds. I would like to see, pubs rammed, watching the rugby on, everything that makes an English pub what it is. I know, speak as an Englishman, but I mean a British pub. The pub is a very different beast from continental bars. But if social distancing demands that we must be a little bit continental for a few months, so be it. If it helps us to survive, I'll take it.
Cool. Thank you. Are there any more questions out there? Okay. Well, Richard, you're presenting another one of these webinars on Wednesday, and 20th at 7 o'clock, and you'll be talking specifically about Milton Brewery and about the various beers that wonderful beers that you produce there. So people tune in for that one. We have got a remarkably extensive list of events happening this week. If you come back at 8 o'clock tonight, we've got the getting started with the home brewery. Cliff Roberts from Downham Isle Brewery will be talking about how he started a home brewery and how you can. Tomorrow we have a beer styles talk with Ricky Dolphin from Burwell Brewery at 7, followed by a brewery chat with the Calverley brothers, Sam and Tom, and they'll be talking about Calverley's Brewery in Hooper Street. Also at the same time, at Pastor Brewery, we'll be talking about their brewery, and their brewery is in Waterbeach. It's a smaller brewery than yours, I believe, Richard. As I mentioned,
see them out of my office window.
Sorry,
I can see them out of my office window.
You can you?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And then Richard, as I say, will be back again on Wednesday, talking about his beers. There is a brewery tasting, Brewboard Brewery at 8:30 on Wednesday. Yes, it is 8:30 on Wednesday, when Stuart and Paul will be tasting some beers. Now, if you'd like to join in that tasting, there is an email address on the Beer Festival website where you can contact the brewery and you can order the beers that they will be tasting, and they will deliver them to you. Thursday, we have Ricky Dolphin from Burwell Brewery, who's going to be talking about his brewery, and that's at 7 o'clock, and the beers they make. And then at 8:30, a very popular brewery, Three Blind Mice, Alex Bragg will be talking about his beer and the brewery. Then at 7, we have SIBA award winners Turpins. Edita and Marcus will be introducing Turpin Brewery, and I believe it was their stout, was it, that the one champion stout of the year not so long ago, SIBA award. And then Mark of Roughacre at 8:30 on Friday will be talking about his beers. And then finally on Saturday, Simon Gibson of Simon Cider will be tasting 12 different ciders and perries, 7 that he's produced and 5 from producers around the country. Now, if you manage to drink all 12, well done. But you can actually, he's doing a presentation box of all 12 ciders, which you can order. And the details of how to order that, again, you can find on the Cambridge website, the Cambridge Beer Festival, or the Cambridge District CAMRA website. So there's plenty to be going on. It's such a shame we're not out in the sunshine.
Absolutely. We have a question to answer as well.
We do we? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Do you want to answer this one then, Richard?
Pete and Andy say, how do you see the effect of large pubcos failing to consider rent issues after the lockdown? Well, it's not just after the lockdown, it's while it's on. And it's difficult. Large pubcos are vast enterprises with huge market capitalizations and the rest of it. They and the big brewers, so it's not just the big pubcos, I think have a responsibility to their tenants to use their financial muscle to help out the little guys. Green King's been around for 200 years. It has the power to borrow at rates that no small businessman can think of approaching, and it's a comparative tiddler to some of the biggest ones. But, and it's quite a big but, those owners of pubs also have expenses going out. They will have mortgages, they will have borrowings. And if they don't have income to meet their expenses, they have a problem. And where do you draw the line between a large pubco and somebody smaller? There are plenty of people in the country whose retirement project was to own a pub, retire, lease it out. That's their only source of income. What is source for Green King is not necessarily a good thing for those people, and it's a very difficult ethical challenge to know where you draw the line at saying, okay, you don't have to pay your rent. After all pubs in the UK now no longer pay business rates for the next 12 months. And anybody who has a pub whose rentable value or rateable value is less than 51,000 has received a grant. Most of them £25,000. Now, the whole point of that grant was to help with fixed costs such as rent. You weren't supposed to just pocket it. And the problem is that not everybody got the £25,000 grant. Some people got 10,000 if they were smaller than that. But if you had a pub with over £51,000, you got nothing. There was zero. And so I think a lot of the the problems that have been built up around rent are real. There's no easy answers. Government has been making rules up on the hoof. I was actually lucky enough to get a reply from the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself, personal reply today, regarding this. He pretty much admits that they're making it up on the hoof. And now my questions related to breweries, unsurprisingly, but I did put in some questions about, well, one specific one about the iniquities in the business rates, and he didn't quite answer it, but they are aware. The government is aware of these problems. So I think the short answer is large pubcos should give people rent holidays. They can take the hit. They can borrow cheaply, and in the great scheme of things, this is not a long-term thing for them. Small enterprises can't do the same. Where you draw the line, thank God, is not my problem.
Okay, thank you, Richard. That's an extensive answer. Have we any more questions out there? No? Well, what I would like to do is to say thank you very much, Richard, for being our first ever online virtual panelist speaker, and it's been very interesting, very informative, and I've certainly learnt a lot about SIBA. I'm sure that we will work together with you in the future. If not nationally, then I'm sure Cambridge branch is looking forward to collaborating on a few things. And we'd be more than happy to do that. It's now 13 minutes to. If there aren't any more questions, I think what we will do is we will complete this webinar now. Unless you've got a final thing to say, Richard, is there anything you want to message you want to give to the people that are listening?
See you on Wednesday. Really, with my SIBA hat on, we all hope and pray that at the end of this, there is a market for small independent breweries. And we need to be vigilant as consumers that this is not an opportunity for a huge land grab by the big, well-capitalized breweries or pubcos who, let's face it, have the power, as with rents, to ride this out with not quite impunity, but certainly they're not going to take the hit there. The small guys are. And I think supporting your small local brewery is now more important than ever before. And it's not just for now. When this finishes, when the pubs are open, just bear us in mind, look out for the SIBA assured British brewer logo on pump clips and on bottles if you're buying from supermarkets. And please don't buy from supermarkets. When the pubs are open, go to the pubs. You know, everybody's got containers now. You can fill them up. That's the way to buy beer. But stay in the pub until it closes. But support your pubs, support your small breweries, because without people's support, we won't be here. And when we're gone, that is an irreplaceable bit of British heritage that will be gone forever. So we're doing our best to hang on. We're all working hard. We're all doing crazy things that we wouldn't normally do. But please keep supporting us.
So I just interrupt you there. Matthew is just about to leave. Matthew Danish, you answered his question about the space earlier. Obviously, he's been to the Haymakers today. It said, cheers, enjoying the beer I bought today. Thanks very much. So that's cool.
Thumbs up from me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done. I shall be down Chesterton next time you're open. Okay, so we have, we got to do, there's another one. There's a Pete and Andy. Do you want to answer this one, Richard?
Oh, I haven't seen this one yet. Hello. Do you think we'll continue to see the expanse of local breweries selling direct to consumers? I honestly don't know. I think some people will. I think it rather depends on how the lockdown ends, because there's a lot of people doing things that they've never done before. You won't be terribly surprised to find that bottles and cans, although the small guys in my part of the industry have been very understanding, but the word is that the futures contracts on bottles and cans and the like are not easy, and depending on how this finishes, it's possible that there will be people left sat on enormous stockpiles of beer in bottles and cans that they don't know what to do with. That would be very bad. But I think this has been an opportunity for brewers to get to know their local consumers possibly a bit better than they did before. As for learning long-term lessons, I think we're all just a bit knackered, and this is possibly the wrong time to try and make long-term predictions. But I think some will. I don't know whether we will. It's probable that we will do something in future. But I think we've got to just see how the future pans out, and whether the pubs that come out of this support local brewers, and those pubs are viable. I think the country needs to rally around the pubs, because without the pubs, the brewers aren't viable. And yeah, at the same time, we're talking from an English perspective. The Scotland a couple of days ago passed a law that's essentially made cans an awful lot more expensive. So as usual, it's all dependent on government.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Pete and Andy, for those questions. Once again, Richard, thank you so much for
no problem
being the first panelist on this season. I will remind you all that Richard is back on Wednesday at 7 o'clock talking about Milton Brewery, and I'm sure he'll go more into the history of that we just touched upon today.
And we're here at the Haymakers 5 till 7 tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday for collections. Obviously, might help for the Wednesday one if you've got some beer. I might just be talking about it.
There you go. Well, there's a hint if ever I heard one. And those details, I believe, are on our website as well. So if you didn't manage to jot them down, do check on the Cambridge CAMRA website and the Cambridge Beer Festival website. Okay, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been very informative and certainly an experience for me, first one of these I've ever done as well. Thank you all, and do come back at 8:30 and learn about getting started with a home brewer with Cliff Roberts. Sounds fascinating, and I will be an attendee. I'll be listening to that one. So do enjoy yourselves, and thank you very much, and good evening, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.